So now from section 6.2, we still have these other types of problems. But notice for these types of problems, I have like squareds. I can move things over. And again, it's not just going to be a simple trig function. So we need some other algebraic ideas first. So that's what we're going to talk about. So now, when I go to this page here, and let's say I take the equation x squared equals x. Now this isn't a trig problem, but how do we solve this? Now what we'll have to do first is we'll have to move the x over. So I'm going to subtract x from both sides. Now notice this is actually a quadratic equation because of the x squared. So that tells me I'm not just going to square root both sides. Okay, so I got to move that over because I have an x on the other side. So I get x squared minus x equals 0. Now the way to finish this problem is I simply have to factor here. So to factor there, I can pull an x out of both of those. So I get an x, and then I get an x minus 1 equals 0. So from here, this is what we call the 0 property. So either this is 0 or this is 0 because their product together equals 0 here. So therefore, one of those has to be 0. So either x is 0 or x minus 1 equals 0. And then when I solve this one for x, I add 1. And then I get x equals 1 or 0. So my two answers are, if I put those together, x equals 0 or 1. Okay, now there's another type of problem that we have to deal with as well. So let's take a look at this. Let me start over. Okay, so we got 6x squared plus x equals 1. So what do we do first? So first off, we're going to have to move the 1 over. So I subtract 1, subtract 1. So notice with any of these for the x squareds and those kind of things, we're getting everything over the same side and getting a 0 on the other side. So that's 6x squared plus x minus 1 equals 0. So just like the previous problem, we'll have to factor this side here. So what we end up getting is, I set up two sets of parentheses here. And what I realize is 6 is composed of a 3 and a 2, or it could be 6 and 1. So I kind of play around with those numbers a little bit. So there's a 3x there and a 2x there. And I have to notice that this here in the middle here is a 1x, and it's positive. So when I do my middle terms, I have to get a 1x. So then what I'm going to do here, and it's positive, so I'm going to make this a 1 here. Oops. And then here, I'm going to do a minus 1. Now the reason why I do this is because a negative 1 plus a positive 1 is going to give me a 1 here. All right, so this is going to be my factorization of that left side. Now factoring is hard for you. Google or YouTube factoring trinomials. Okay, so remember that, factoring trinomials, and that will help. So I just did a simple trial and error method here. Maybe not simple, but a trial and error method. Anyways, let's get back to this. So now, since I have this times here in the middle here, so therefore either 3x minus 1 equals 0 or 2x plus 1 equals 0. So then my answers for this, once I solve this for x here, I'm going to move the 1 over and divide by 3. So x is going to equal 1/3. And for this one here, I'm going to move the 1 over and divide by 2. So x is going to equal negative 1/2. So those would be my two answers for this problem. So here we go. Let's start over. Now let's get back to the trig stuff using those simple or not so simple algebra ideas. All right, so now we're going to look back here and let's take a look at these. Let's try number, let's see, 34 is what we're going to try. We're going to try this one here. Now remember, it says from 0 to 360 there. So we have to keep that in mind when we're finding our answers. So we're going to just write that on the next page. So there's our problem. So now let's take a look at this. So this runs into that first scenario I showed you a minute ago with the x squared equaling x. Because what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to move this cosine over. So I'm going to have to subtract cosine of theta. And when I do that, and I do that from both sides, I'm going to get the sine squared of theta, cos of theta, minus cosine theta equals 0. So now what I do from here is I just take a look at this left side here and I say, okay, I'm just going to factor out a cosine of theta. And I'm going to have left in parentheses sine squared theta minus 1 equals 0. And I get 1 because think about this. If I distributed this back through again, that would give me sine squared theta, cosine squared theta. And I have to get a cosine back here. So that means I would have to distribute a negative 1 there in order for me to get that. Okay, so here we go. So now we have our multiplication here, don't we? Yeah, so since we have that multiplication there, that tells me cosine of theta equals 0, or sine squared theta minus 1 equals 0. So now to do this first part, I would have to think of that triangle again for this cosine of theta here, equaling 0. So I would think of that unit circle here, and where is cosine of theta equaling 0 at? And if I kind of understood that unit circle in a way, I could say that it happens here and actually down here. So that would actually be pi over 2, but we're dealing with degrees, so this would be 90 degrees. And this one down here would be 270 degrees. So that would be my answer for this first part here, the cosine of theta equals 0. So now for the next part, I'm going to have to think of something a little bit different here. We got some extra steps to do here before we finish this. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to finish this up. So now for this one, I can move the 1 over to the other side. So I'm going to add 1 to both of those. And I end up with sine squared theta equals 1. And then here, I can actually square root both sides. So when I square root both sides, remember, on the left, I get the sine of theta. And on the right side, I get plus or minus 1, because when I square root, it adds a plus and a minus. So now I just do the same thing again. I just do my triangle here. And when I think of that triangle, here, all I'm doing now is saying, okay, this is either going to be a positive 1 or negative 1. So if I'm thinking of sine being positive or negative 1, where does that occur? So now if I think of these ideas here, okay, where is it 1 or negative 1 at? So I know sine is 1 here. And I also know sine is negative 1 down here. So that tells me it's going to be either 90 degrees or 270 degrees. Now, is there any other answers for that? Let's see. Nope, that would be all. That's positive and negative. So my answer altogether is going to be theta equals 90 degrees or 270 degrees. Now, let's make sure we have everything we need here, and this is correct. So when I flip back, the direction's set from 0 to 360. So therefore, I did it correctly. So those would be my answers that I would have for this. Since they were the same, I only have to count them once. We'll do the next problem in the next video.